issues, clean and reshape your data in order to have the best Power BI models. So a few things about me. My name is Tristan. I'm from France. I created a company called DataPulse. We are doing consulting and training services on the Microsoft Data Platform, so mostly Power BI and Fabric, obviously. We are based in France, but we operate everywhere in the world. I am also the co-founder of Club Power BI and Club Fabric, which are our Power BI and Fabric user groups in France. You can also find me on YouTube, Twitter, or LinkedIn if you want to have more information. I share some resources online. To be honest, most of it is in French, which is good for you. You get two for the price of one, Power BI news, Fabric news, and French, if you want to know a bit more about French. So as I said, the topic of today is about using Power Query lists in order to solve business problems. So let's deep dive into the session right now. I'm going to go to Power BI and we're going to manipulate and create lists in order to solve business issues. So the first thing is, what is a list? A list, it's a component, it's an object available in a Power Query. It is not a table. So for example, this is a table with one column called countries, and you can recognize the icon here saying that this is a table. A list is a bit different. So if I create a new query, blank query, this is the syntax to create a list. For example, I'm going to create a list with two items, France and Australia. Let me zoom in a bit. So this is the syntax to create a list in Power Query. So this list is using this syntax in order to be created, and those are the different items of the list. So if I click enter, here you can see that I have a different object. This is a table, okay, table, and this is a list. So of course, you can do multiple things with list. For example, you can do operations on it. For example, list.count, which will return, 2 in this case. Yes, list.count to count the number of items in the list. I can, for example, manage distinct values here. If I do list.distinct, yep. So as you can see, this is the way to create lists, and the M language allows you to perform some operations, some tasks on these lists. Another cool thing to mention as an introduction is that, a bit like JSON file, you can embed or join several lists. So for example, I can do this. So this is a list with two items, France and Australia, and I can do and, for example, UK. Okay, so here I am combining two lists into one, which is called query one. Okay, so these are the typical basic operations that you can do in Power Query in order to create, manipulate lists. Of course, the goal of this session is to show you how we can use this syntax and this object in order to go really further in terms of data cleansing and data operations. One last thing I wanted to mention as an introduction is the principle of embedding or lists of lists. You can actually embed this into another list. So let's say USA. Okay, so if you look at the syntax now, I have one big list, which is here. Okay, and this list contains two lists, the first list and the second list. Okay, so you can definitely embed or play with lists and nest them into different levels. This will be practical when we will do some exercises. You will better understand the structure of this kind of nested list later, but I wanted to mention it as an introduction. Okay, so the good news is in Power BI, lists are everywhere, even when you don't notice them. For example, technically, this one table column has a list. Why? Because in Power BI, the table structure is the following. You have rows, which are actually records, and you have columns. Here I only have one column, And actually, columns in Power BI are lists. So each column, technically speaking, in terms of Power Query structure, each column is actually a list. For example, if I click on drill down here from this particular column called countries, you will see that I get the list of each values in the column, and I have shifted from a table into a list. Okay, and there are multiple functions that we will cover today, which help you shift from table to list or from list to columns, because these objects have a high level of interaction between them. I'm talking about lists and tables. Okay, so that was the introduction. Now you know a bit more about list, the syntax, the table structure, the kind of operations you can do with it. So now we can deep dive into the session and see some real life examples. So the first example I want to show you is to use lists as a way to properly and efficiently filter your data in Power BI. So let's take an example. Here I have this table. Sorry, it's called sales, so it's this table. So this table contains a few rows and some columns. Sorry, it's gonna show up in a sec. I'm connected to a Fabric data warehouse, but it needs to warm. Yes. So this table has 3 columns: products ID, countries, and sales. So basically 3 sets of lists and a few rows. Okay. So this is just an example. I don't need to show you big amounts of data. You just need to be aware of the table structure. So this table has some countries here: France, Italy, and Spain. The thing is, sometimes for audit test purposes, or sometimes for security reasons, you may want to filter the data at the Power Query level in order to restrict the number of rows and the scope of your table. The most basic way to do it is to go here and to apply a static filter. Let's say I only want to filter the rows for France. And basically it will remove all the other rows and it will only load this particular set of data into your Power BI model. The good news is that you can use lists in order to do this in a more professional, safe way. So here what I'm going to do, this is my first demo, I'm going to create a Power Query parameter in order to make it more variable, let's say, my filtering experience. So I'm going to call it country p underscore country, p for parameter. So parameter to filter my country. The type will be text. And here in the suggested values sections, most of you, when you use Power Query parameters, you probably use any value, right? But as an input of your parameter, you can also use a list of values. The good news is that this list is predefined and it forces the user to choose only between the items of the list. That's what I'm going to do here. So my list of value will be France and this. Okay, my default value will be France and my current value will be France. Okay, so now I have a Power Query parameter which actually takes its source from a list. I can see the different items of the list here. I have this drop down. And the good news is that now I can use this Power Query parameter, which contains a list, as a way to filter my data properly. So if I go here, going back to this query, instead of doing this static manual filter, I can actually edit my step here. And instead of hard coding the criteria, I go here and I select parameter. And now I can pick my P country parameter, which is nice because now not only I am doing my filter in a better way because I have centralized somewhere my filter criteria. And this filter criteria is a Power Query parameter, which is constrained. Okay, constrained. Sorry, I forgot the S. Because it only takes an input from a list of 3 items: France, Italy, and Spain. Okay, so that's cool. And the good news is that this kind of operations supports query folding. So in this case, I am connected to my SQL Server database, which is actually a Fabric database, to be more precise. And if I click here, if I right-click on my step, if I go to View Native Query, so this is called query folding. It's the ability of the M engine to convert M instructions into SQL. Instead of applying the cleansing in Power BI, it will send the query back to the source in SQL in this case, because my data source is SQL Server. Okay, so there are some situations in Power BI where you can have query folding for certain operations, and when the data source has some compute which supports SQL. It's the case here, and you see that even using lists and Power Query parameters, the engine is able to convert this M instruction into a SQL instruction, which is nice because it sends the query back to the source, and it's supposed to be more powerful and cheaper and faster and more efficient. Okay. Of course, this is for development and test purposes. So you may face a situation or you say, okay, I only want to filter this particular country for development. So you can, for example, add an if statement. So let me, for example, I'm going to edit my parameter here. Sorry, not here. Manage parameters. And I'm going to add a new item in my list, which is called all. And I'm going to set it to all. And you can, of course, play with the list in a conditional way. So that's what I will do here. I will say, okay, if P country equals all, then previous step, which is called DBO sales, I guess, else do this. Okay, so this is my Power Query step where I'm making a conditional filtering, where sometimes I don't want to filter my data when I want to deploy to prod or when I finished my tests. So I can play with my list and my parameter in a conditional instruction, for example. Okay, so that was the first demo. Sometimes you even want to go further. So sometimes, for example, when you filter the data, you don't want to filter with just one value. You want to filter the column based on a list of values. For example, France and Italy, but you want to make it conditional or at least dynamic. You want to pass a list of values, which can be several values, as a criteria for your filter instructions. So for example, here I could select France and Italy, and this will generate the corresponding code because I only have 3 values, so it says different than Spain. Or I could say, okay, I want to filter only Spain, and then in this case, it does this. Okay. So again, lists can come to the rescue because you can definitely pass a list of values as a filter criteria in your Power Query instruction. So how to do that? Let's take an example. Here, I have an Excel file, which is somewhere, and this Excel file contains all the different values that I want to potentially use as a filter criteria in my report. So the good news is that it's dynamic. I can give it to the users. My business users can maintain this Excel file and choose what scope do they want to bring in their Power BI data model. What I'm going to do is that this is a table because it comes from an Excel file with only one column. I'm going to drill down to get the corresponding list of values. Why? Because as I told you earlier, a column in Power BI is actually a list, and I need the list object here in my example in order to pass the different items of the list as a filter criteria. So I'm gonna first convert this table into a list, and then now I'm gonna use this particular list as my filter criteria for my table. So let's do it. I go to sales, And instead of hard coding again my filter here, I'm gonna say each list that contains, okay? So what this function does, before I do this, let me showing it in a more easy way. List.contains, basically, what it does is that it will iterate over each item in your list, and it will say, okay, does it contain this number or this string or not? So basically, it returns true or false. So for example, I'm going to say, does the list A, B, sorry, C contains A? So apparently the answer is going to be true. Yes. But does it contain D? No, the answer is false. So I'm going to use this expression as my filter criteria. This will be my list of values coming from the Excel file. Yes. And this will be each row of my sales table. Okay, basically this is what I'm going to do here. Now, so now that you understand a bit better how list contains works, let me go back here. So each list contains countries table. So you remember that was my list of values that I get from my Excel file. And then my column was called, I think, countries. Oh, data privacy, I forgot to, sorry. Yeah. I'm gonna remove this in my settings. Give me a sec. It's because I have just downloaded Power BI desktop in English before the session, and I probably didn't ignore the privacy settings. Okay, so it works. I can now dynamically filter my tables depending on the list of values, which is dynamic and which can be, for example, managed and controlled by the business users. So here, of course, because my list already contained France, Italy, and Spain, I don't have any filters applying here. I see all the rows. But now, for example, if I go back to the Excel file, to the source where I can control my input, my list of values, let's say I'm going to remove Italy, for example, from the scope of my analysis. So this is the source. This is my Excel file. Okay. Now, if I go here, if I refresh my list here connected to my Excel file, Italy will disappear, and it also disappears from my scope in my sales table. So this is a way to apply dynamically a set of values as filter criteria using lists objects. So just a comment, there will be a replay of this video, and all the code and all the techniques I'm showing you right now are already available in my GitHub. So you will be able to get the file and the corresponding code and the different examples. I will provide you with the link at the end of the session. So don't worry, you don't have to remember everything. You will have the replay plus the resources and all the code and stuff. Okay, are there any questions so far? Let me check in the chat. I don't see any questions. That was the first part of the demo, which is how to use lists in order to apply some set of filters in a cool and dynamic way to my Power BI tables. If there are not questions, I'm gonna move forward in my demo, and I'm gonna now work on more technical and advanced stuff. We're gonna work on column names, renaming columns dynamically, applying some criteria on our column names, and so on. So let me give you an example. Here, this is the table which has 3 columns: product ID, countries, and sales. let's say that I am not happy with these column names, so I want to rename those columns. If I do this, let's say I'm gonna say ID product, then countries, I want ID country, and sales, I will do total sales like this. Okay. So as you can see, I have manually renamed my columns. And if you look at the corresponding M code, I forgot to tell you, if you want to see the corresponding M code, you need to go to View and turn on the formula bar in order to see the M script corresponding to the steps you are applying to your tables in Power Query. So if I have a look at this particular code, you see that I have a list of 3 lists. Remember the beginning of my demo where I taught you the structure and the syntax around list? We are exactly here. And again, this is an example which shows you that lists are everywhere in Power BI. When you use Power Query, even without knowing, even without being necessarily aware of it, you are definitely manipulating lists every day, every time you are doing some operations in Power Query. So this is an example. When you rename columns, it actually creates a list of lists. So what does it contain exactly? So this is my first list. And then this big list contains the couple of old and new columns for every column that I renamed. This was the old name, new name, old name, new name, old name, new name. So I have 3 lists, as you can see here, embedded into one list. Sometimes renaming your columns in Power Query in such a manual way, it's time consuming. It can be a source of error, and it's manual. Okay, so we don't like manual things in Power BI. And of course, if you have a data warehouse or Fabric, BigQuery, Snowflake, or whatever, you should definitely manage the name of your columns in the backend, like do it upstream in your data warehouse, in your views, for example. But there are many projects where you do not have the chance to have a data warehouse or a data lake or whatever, and Power Query needs to manage everything: the data shape, the data structure, and the names of the columns and tables and so on. And sometimes you want to apply column names dynamically, or at least you want to be able to maintain in a central and smart way what are the names in my model, what are the names of my tables and my columns. So there are several techniques that you can use in Power Query in order to manage this in a smarter way. And guess what? Power Query lists to the rescue. So let's go here. I'm going to show you that you can parameterize the way you rename your columns in Power Query. Here, I have a table. It could be an Excel file, or it could be, I don't know, a table maintained by by the data governance team or by whatever team, which says, okay, these are the column names that we have in the source, and these are the column names that we want to get in our Power BI semantic models. This is really smart and good because you might have multiple Power BI semantic models connected to the same data source. And you want to make sure that all your semantic models at the end, as an output, they get the names that you want which are the final names here. So as you can see, I have the correspondence between the old and the new name that I want to have. This table can be maintained again by the business or by a central team, and it's completely dynamic. Okay, you can change it. You can add columns here, you can rename them from here, and so on. So what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna use a new function, which is called table to rows, which is going to help me have this kind of structure with lists and the corresponding couples nested into each list. So how to achieve that? I'm going to start from this table. So this table is called mapping columns. And I'm going to create a new function new query, sorry, and I'm gonna use this new M function, which is called table to rows. It's quite simple to use because I just need to pass a table as an argument. That's it, nothing else. So table to rows, I'm gonna say mapping columns. And guess what? I have exactly the structure and the input that I need. Why? Because table to rows return a list of lists. Each item of the list is actually old, new, old, new, old, new. So this is perfect. I have exactly the set, the correct structure that the table.rename columns expects, right? This is exactly what I get. I have a list of 3 lists. Each item of this list is a list with the old and the new name. Okay? So what do I need to do? Well, very easy now. I'm gonna go here, and instead of this manual hard-coded process, I'm gonna remove all of this. Okay? I am still under the rename columns function, and I'm just gonna say table to rows mapping columns. And that's it. So now the problem is, I made it on purpose, no worries, this is not a bug. This is for training and information purposes. I have actually an error, which is quite classic and frequent in this kind of use case. The column sale of the table wasn't found. So what's going on here? Here I have my original names are product ID, countries, and sales. Okay, but in my mapping column, I expect these initial names, product ID, countries, and sale without the S. And the problem is when I try to rename the columns of the sales table using this mapping column, the Power Query engine does not find the sale column here, which is a problem because it doesn't know how to apply the name transformation. So in order to avoid this error or to manage it, I actually have an optional parameter under table rename columns, which allows me to skip or ignore the error. So I'm going to say missing field, ignore. Okay, so in this case, I have used my mapping columns as a parameter criteria in order to dynamically rename my columns, which now have the correct column names. However, you see that this column, because it wasn't found in my mapping columns, it generated an error which was ignored. So basically, it kept the original name, which actually is not really what I wanted, right? So here I have 2 options in order to do that. First, I need to be able to identify, okay, what are the columns which haven't been properly renamed thanks to this system. First, I want the renaming to actually happen, right? So if I go back to my mapping column, I can just adjust here my setting and say, okay, sorry, I made a mistake. The initial column was sales. And that's it. Now I have the correct renaming. Sales was exactly renamed as sales VAT, right? So you see in action how useful and user-friendly it is to manage column renaming with lists, is that you can have a separate table parameter where you can just set all the new columns and everything updates accordingly. Okay? Actually, let's say that I didn't know that there were some columns which were not renamed. You can actually use lists as well as a way to track, audit, and understand the errors. So this is another very interesting use case about lists, is that not only it allows you to apply some filters or rename columns in a dynamic way, you can also use this weapon, I'm talking about lists, in order to find some differences in your data and to use Power Query a bit like an audit tool in order to track some weird things between tables. So let me explain to you. There is a function which is called table.columnNames, where I just need to pass the name of my table. And guess what? This function returns a list again. Lists are everywhere, as I said. So this function returns a list of all the columns that I have in the table. So ID product, ID country, and sales. Okay? So this is the list of my columns in my sales table. Great. I can technically also get as a list this set of values, which are the name of the columns that my table is supposed to have at the end as an output, right? So if I say, so let me copy this, or I'm going to say N, and I can say mapping columns, final. Okay, so these are the column names of my sales table, and these are the expected column names that I'm supposed to have from my mapping table once I have transformed my column names. And guess what? You can definitely use lists instructions in order to compare the red list with the blue list in order to identify are there some missing values or some things which did not happen. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to say list.difference, which is another function. This function allows me to compare two lists. So the first list I'm going to compare is this one, and the second is this one. Yes. And now what I see is that, of course, I have a difference between my column name here and my mapping final here, which is the sales. Yes, indeed, sales is part of my final column names here, but it's not part of my expected column name output in the final column mapping table. So in this way, I have used lists not only to apply transformations, but also to find some discrepancies and some differences between what I get and what I expected. Okay, so in this case, this instruction helps me understand that there is an issue with the sales column, which is not properly named in my mapping table. Thanks to that, I can, for example, disable the load of this function. And going back to my mapping table, I will understand that this is what I need. Now I have it here, and now my difference is blank. Great. I have no difference between what I get and what I expected. This is perfect. Okay, so as you can see, very interesting. Lists are very powerful, not only to apply transformations or renaming columns or applying filters, but you can also use them with using list.difference in order to compare them. And it's really useful in many business cases such as this one. Okay, so let's keep going on column names. I have another example to show you, which is even more advanced and sometimes more interesting. So let's take this example. I have this table, which is called quantities. This table has 4 columns: store, customer key, product key, and quantity. And as you can see, this is a bit annoying because I get these, little thing here before the name of each column except the last one, which seems to be okay. So, of course, I could manually rename this and say, okay, remove this, and then remove this, and then remove this. But I don't really like doing this. Why? Because first, it's manual, it's source of error, it's hard coding the couples of columns that I want to use in my instruction. I don't really like that. And I have already faced some situations where I had not 3, but 30 or 50 columns to rename. And using this kind of manual task is a bit time consuming, and I don't like wasting my time, right? I'm lazy. So how could I manage this in a more dynamic way? First, yes, I could use the table two rows technique, and I could put these column names as input, right? As the initial, here I could put the underscore with the different columns and then the final columns expected. That would be one way to handle this issue. There is another way, which in this case is better, I think. It's to use another function which again leverages the power and the beauty of lists. So, as I told you, if I use this instruction, it returns a list containing all the column names of my table, right? The thing is, I want to apply some transformations on these column names. In this case, what I want to do is that I want to remove this annoying character here at the beginning. Actually, I can do this in an automated and smart way by using an instruction which is called list.transform. So essentially, what this function does is that it takes a list as an input, and thanks to the second argument of the function, you're going to be able to apply, you're going to be able to loop over each item of your list, and you will be able to apply the same logic to each item in your list. So in this case, for example, what I could say is, so this is the syntax, x, and then I'm passing the function. So this is the syntax in Power Query M in order to apply a set of logic or function to each item in a list. For example, in this case, I could say to x, transform it by adding, I don't know, this string character. And as you can see here, now I have applied to my list, I have transformed it by making a each or loop. Okay, here it's a kind of a each statement or loop, where for each x of my list, I am adding at the end of my string the word Australia. Okay, of course, this is not what I want to do here. Huh? This was just an example for you to understand how to apply a certain logic to each item in a list. In this case, what I want to do is to remove this. So what I'm going to do is text after delimiter, x, and my delimiter is this one. Yes? So now, with this instruction, I have removed after my delimiter, but I get an issue. Remember, my last column had a proper name. It didn't contain this annoying little character at the beginning, right? So what I'm going to say in order to manage this is, if text contains this, then initial column name, else this. Sorry, it's the opposite. If the column name contains this character, then you need to remove it. Else, just take the original column name as it is. Perfect. So now I have managed in a dynamic way how to remove certain character of my columns using a function which I apply to each item in my list. It's beautiful. It's a little bit complex, I agree, especially for beginners. But once you dive into this syntax and way of thinking, you can do crazy automatic and dynamic things in Power Query. So now we're going to apply this to our quantities table. The good news is that there is a function which exists in Power BI, in Power Query, which allows you to perform this kind of operations on column names. This function is called transform column names. So let me go through here. I'm starting from the previous step, so that was my previous step. And I'm going to say table.transform column names. This will do exactly what I showed you. This will take the column names of the table and it will apply a certain logic to each item of the list, which is the column names, right? So I'm going back to my code here, and I'm going to be able to apply the same function. Let me remove this. Yes. And I go here, and I apply my function. So now, dynamic columns renaming. Yes. Now, thanks to this function, table.transform column names, I have been able to apply a custom repetitive logic to each column in my table, each column name. Sorry. Very interesting, right? Very dynamic and smart way to handle column names. I really like it, this one. Are there any questions so far or raised hands? Are there some people who, I don't know, want to ask me anything about this?
Tristan, I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
Would it be possible to take what you've done here and create a function? So instead of having to do it for each individual table, you could then create a function instead.
Yes. Yes. So in this case, this would not be a DAX UDF, right, which is new. This would be a custom personalized M function, which definitely does that. Yeah, definitely. If I have time at the end of the session, maybe I will show you how effectively using this as a separate centralized function. Yeah, but the answer is yes.
Okay, just good to know, because I mean it's awesome what you're doing, but I was going, if you have a whole lot of tables that have that same pattern, having to copy paste.
Cool. True. That's a good comment. Another thing which is another thing which is interesting here, and I was a bit surprised, even that kind of dynamic operations is supported by query folding. Look, if I go here, I'm connected to the same database, okay? SQL Server. If I go here, view native query, you see that it's not grayed out. And even by doing complex things, manipulating lists and functions and so on, the engine is still able to understand how to translate this into SQL. This is quite impressive. This is nice. I like it. Congrats, Microsoft. I don't know how you have achieved that, but it's quite good. I think it's because they interpret the outcome of this and say, okay, he's just renaming columns. And we know how to do that in SQL. It's easy. Yeah, very cool. Okay, so now I am done with playing with column names and filtering data. Now we're gonna talk about another business use cases, which is working on the data itself, like cleaning the data and reshaping the structure of the data. So let's see another example. Here, I have another table which gives me the cost of each plant by country. So here I have two plants, P1 and P2. Their cost is 10 and 30. P3 and P4, and so on. Here I have three plants with their corresponding cost. This kind of table structure is not easy at all for Power BI modeling and visuals and analysis. Why? Because I need to have one row for each plant and their corresponding cost and country. It is not the case here. I have this annoying thing, which is quite common if you're working with business users who provide, for example, Excel files. Sometimes they merge cells or they, I don't know how to say this in English, but they jump one line and you have this kind of structure, which is completely annoying for data analysis and modeling. The good news here is that, of course, Power Query can come to the rescue. And guess what? Again, we're going to be using lists in order to reshape our data and to get one row for each plant and their corresponding cost and country. So how can we do that? I need to introduce you to another great function using lists. It's called text.split. So let me show you this. Okay, so what this function does is that it takes a string as an input. You will then mention a separator, and it will transform the text into a list. So let's take an example. If I say, okay, France, Australia, and New Zealand. Okay. And then my separator is comma. So you see here that my input was text, but thanks to this function and thanks to the separator that you get here, you can actually convert. We saw a bit earlier in the session that you can convert a table to a list. You can also convert a list to a table. I will show you this later, but you can also do the same with strings and text. You can actually transform a text into a list. This list has three items because it had two separators here, which are the same, which are the comma: France, Australia, and New Zealand. So this function is very useful in Power BI because there are many situations where in order to apply some transformations or in order to reshape the data, you prefer to work with lists, but the input is not a list. The input is a text or whatever. And having the ability to convert from text to list is very useful. In this case, this is exactly what I want to do. In this case, what I want to do is that I want to convert this annoying structure in order to have a proper list, and then I will expand the corresponding rows in a nice and easy way, let's say. So that was the first function that you needed to know in order to understand the logic that I'm going to put in place right now. The second function that you need to know, it's a bit more complex. It's called table.fromColumns. So let me introduce you to this function. As you can see, I'm taking a lot of risk in this session because I'm coding everything live from you, starting from scratch. I have no prepared stuff. I'm coding everything live from you, using brackets and semi-brackets and whatever. But anyway, that's the kind of session I like doing. So table.fromColumn. So what this function does, as it indicates, is that it will create a table from a set of columns. And what did I tell you earlier? Columns in Power Query are actually lists. A list is a column. So actually what this function will do is that it will create a table based on the list of lists. So for example, I can say, okay, first list A, B, second list, sorry, C, D. Okay, so as you can see, what this function does is that it takes a list of multiple lists and it creates a table with the corresponding values. So here, basically, it's the first column. You see it here. Here, it's the second column that you see here, right? I could create a third column. You got it, right? Yep. So let's summarize. Let's recap. We have a function which allows us to shift from text to list. And we have a function which helps us transform this list or this list of lists into a table. Well, that's perfect. That's exactly what I need in this case. So going back to my example, what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to create a new column. This one is a bit technical. Let's say output. So first, what I'm going to do, I'm going to use text.split on the plant ID, and I will use, this is the character to be used in order to manage line breaks. I found the name now in English. I think it's line breaks. In French, it's saut à la ligne. Saut à la ligne. Yeah. Okay. So as you can see here, I have a new column which creates a list with P1 and P2. Great. Actually, there is a simplification of this function in the particular use case where you are using line breaks as separator. I just discovered by preparing this session, I didn't know about that, but when I prepared the session, I have found out randomly that actually there is a native function in Power Query which handles that. It's called lines to text. Lines to text, or maybe from text. Yeah. Plant ID. And basically what this does, it does exactly the same as text.split plant ID. This, sorry. Yeah, this is what it does. But the reason why I wanted to show you text.split is that it's more general, it's more generic. You might not always have this separator. Okay, this only works if you have the separator line breaks, which is my case here. I'm lucky. But you might have other situations where you do not have this separator. You have, I don't know, comma or whatever. So text.split, yes. So now I have this. What I'm going to do now is that I'm going to say, okay, but I want to create a table with the corresponding rows for this and this. So table from columns. Okay, this will be my first list, this one. And my second list will be lines from text of my cost. Yes. Should work. Let's check. So I have applied the same transformation for my plant ID and my cost column. And both of them are the founding structure of my table, which is here. And there we go. Now I have a table which has one row for each cost, or for each plant, sorry. It's perfect. That's exactly what I needed. I have just used and combined two functions, which are lines from text and table from columns. Nice. So now add table. I don't need this anymore. Remove, expand. And my column 1 is my plant ID. And my column 2 is my cost. And then here it's text, and here it's whole number. And there we go. We went from this, which is really annoying, to this, just by using two smart and nice, useful, a bit advanced, I reckon, list functions. In this case, unfortunately, it's a bit too complex for the M engine to convert into SQL. Okay, in this case, query folding is not supported. I'm not that surprised. We are manipulating some kind of objects that the SQL engine does not really like, let's say. Okay. But it's okay, because again, most of the time you will apply this precisely when you don't have a data warehouse, when you work with Excel files on SharePoint as a source or whatever. So you don't need query folding because your source does not support SQL and cannot fold anyway. So yeah. Okay, so that was the demo about using lists in order to reshape the data. Are there any reactions, questions to this, Gilbert or whatever, whoever? No?
No, nothing at the moment.
Okay, I have one last example. Do we still have time, Gilbert? Maybe like 5 minutes and then the conclusion?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, please.
Okay, so one last example, which is very common, especially when you work with business users who provide budgets in, for example, Excel files in SharePoint. This is a very common business use case. So the use case is the following. I have some budgets. I have one row for each store, okay? And I have the corresponding budgets, which are structured into columns, because this is a nice table structure for business users in order to be able to read the data and to be able to read it mostly. The thing is, it's a bit annoying to work with this kind of structure. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to unpivot the other columns, right? So that I have a better structure, and this will be my month, my budget month year. Yeah. And this will be my budget quantity. I'm going to shift this to date and this to whole number. Okay. Now, and pivot dates. Okay. Now the problem is, as you can see, for example, if I focus on one store, I have the budget at the monthly grain. Sometimes there are some use cases where you would like to have the budget at the daily grain. And for example, apply like a pro rata to your monthly objective and to split it by all the dates which are contained in this particular month. So basically, in other words, you need to adjust the grain of your budget table by shifting from monthly details to daily details. And this will help business users compare their actuals and their budget on a daily basis, even if the budget is initially provided at the monthly level. And there are several ways to handle that. You can do it, of course, in the backend, in SQL, if you have the chance, again, to have a data warehouse, but this is not always the case. You can try to manage that kind of things with DAX. I like DAX. I'm a big fan of DAX, but in my opinion, for this kind of use cases, DAX is not very convenient. And if you have big volumes of data, it might not be very performant. So in this case, we're going to assume that I don't want to do it in DAX, and I don't have the chance to have a data engineer or a data warehouse available to adjust the grain of my budget at the daily level. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to adjust this grain and change the structure and the grain of my budget table using Power Query. And guess what? Again, Power Query lists to the rescue. So again, here my business assumption, which is not always true, but in this case, what I want to do is that I want to divide this number by, for example, for January 2025, I want to divide my monthly budget, which is 68. I want to divide it by 31 because I'm making an assumption that all the dates in the same month will have the same target. Sometimes you want to do more advanced things like based on last year or whatever. This is not my assumption here. My assumption is to adjust the grain of my budget by shifting from monthly to daily details and dividing by the number of days. Okay, so how to do that? You're gonna see it's pretty simple using lists and Power Query interface. So first, what I'm going to do, I'm gonna add a column using the interface, which gives me the start of the month for each month. Sorry, I'm gonna remove the filter on the store because I want to apply this obviously on every store. Okay, so let me add start of month. Okay. Now, what I want to do is to count the number of days I have within each month, because this will be used to divide my monthly budget quantity. So there are several ways to do that. For example, I could compute the number of days between start and end, or I can simply count the day here. Extract the day, sorry. So I'm going to do here, day, and there we go. So yes, in January I have 31 days, in February I have 28 days, and so on and so on. Add number of days. Great. So now, what I need to do is to create a row for each day of each month for each store in order to shift from monthly detail to daily detail. How to do that? List. I'm going to use a list. So there is this function which is called list.dates. This is popular, for example, for creating calendar tables, which are pretty useful in Power BI modeling and DAX and so on. So it takes a start date as an input, a number of days, and a step, and then it creates the corresponding list of dates. In this case, I'm going to use this function not to create a calendar table, but to create the corresponding list of dates for every month. So going back here, under my budget table, custom column, dates, list dates. First argument, it will be my start of month. Second argument, how many days do I need to increment this list? Well, by this column, which is the number of days in the month. Yes. And then my grain will be daily. Great. So now I have the corresponding list for each day in the month, which is nice. Before expanding this list, I have 96 rows. So I have basically one row for each month for each store. Add dates. Okay. I'm going to do the divide of the budget to have it at the daily grain as well. So daily budgeted amount, it will be my initial amount divided by the number of days, right? There you go. We're going to put it into number, add daily budget. Great. So now I don't need my initial table, my initial columns, and I can just expand to new rows my table. Let me fix this, put it into a date. Now I have obviously more rows. I had 96 rows before shifting from monthly to daily. Now I have a bit more rows, but the good news is that I have a structure which is perfect for data modeling and DAX. I can link this budget table to my calendar table. I can easily compute my daily budgets and my year-to-date and month-to-date budgets in DAX, for example. And again, I have shifted from this to this by combining the beauty of the Power Query interface and the lists. In this case, list dates. Typical example where you adjust the grain of your budget using lists in Power Query. So, as a conclusion, of course, I could have shown you many things. I could have spent one day showing you. I have so many other examples, but I had to choose only some of them in order to showcase and illustrate the beauty and the power of lists. As a conclusion, Power Query lists are an excellent weapon to clear and prepare your data. We've seen concrete business use cases in order to filter the data, to rename columns, to reshape the content of your data and the structure of your table, to also change the grain of the table and so on. We covered parameters and many functions contain split, table to rows, difference, table columns, list date, list select, transform column names, and so on. Most of these operations can fall back to the source when it's possible. Of course, again, I'm going to repeat. If you have a data warehouse, do it upstream, okay? All the things I have shown you right now, if you have Fabric, if you have a data warehouse, whatever technology, if you have a data engineer in your team, or if you are yourself a data engineer, try to do it upstream. It will be better in terms of performance, data governance, data lineage, and so on. But again, there are many projects and business use cases where you need to apply these kind of transformations without necessarily having a data warehouse or a data engineer available. And in that case, you need to do it in Power Query. Hence this session, and hence the beauty of lists, because it helps you achieve that even if you're not a data engineer or even if you don't have a data warehouse. Also, keep in mind that I have done all my demos in Power BI Desktop, but Power Query and thus Power Query lists are also available in other technologies in the Microsoft world. You can use lists, Power Query lists in Excel. You can also use them in Dataflows Gen 1, which only requires a Power BI Pro license. So not even Premium or Fabric or whatever. You can use, of course, these lists in the Power Query engine of Fabric, Dataflows Gen 2. You can also use them if you have Dataverse or Power Apps projects using Power Platform data flows. So keep in mind that the things I have shown you here today do not only restrict to Power BI Desktop. You can apply those techniques, and all the functions I have shown you today are available in all the other Power Query engines where Microsoft makes it available, which is a good news, right? So I am done for this session. I hope you enjoyed. I did a lot of things, a lot of live coding and demo. I tried to choose common business use cases. In terms of resources, so the slides and the codes are available on my GitHub. Let me put this in the chat right now. Sorry, here. Yeah, I'm gonna simply paste this to the session. Also, I think Gilbert will publish a replay of this video on your Power BI YouTube channel so that you can have the code, the file, and also the video. I want to thank you for inviting me today. I hope you enjoyed the session. And if you have any questions, just feel free to ask. I'm still available and we can take a few minutes in order to have some discussions. Thank you again.
Yeah, thanks, Tristan. That was really good. You definitely know a lot more about lists and Power Query than I do, that's for sure.
You know, I come from the Excel world, so I am more into Fabric and SQL with my team and so on. But I come from the Excel world, so I had to do these kind of things before I knew even about SQL or Fabric or whatever.
Yep, no, for sure. Yeah, if there's anyone who wants to ask any questions, more than welcome to come off mute. Everyone's just saying thank you, great session in the comments, which it definitely was. Yep, and I will. I may as well stop the recording. Actually, I'll let it go just in case there's a couple of questions. If there are any questions before I upload it. One question I have.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
One question I had is, when you're doing like you've got these lists of lists, which is all dynamic. Is there any way to trace that kind of stuff? Because like sometimes you could be like 5 deep in a dynamic list, where one's referencing another one. Is there any way to trace it? Because sometimes if you're troubleshooting your work, you come back 6 months later and you can't remember what you've done.
Yeah. So is there a way to track this? Not really, but for example, what I could have done, and I didn't have the time to do it here because I want it's to do some comments or to to put the arguments and to indent my code a little bit to understand at which level we are in the list and that kind of thing. Yeah, Anthony just said comment your code.
Yeah, absolutely. That's always a good one, but sometimes you just
But you're right. To my knowledge, I might be wrong, but there is no native function or feature which allows you to visualize what's going on in your nested objects and so on. I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, no, because I was just looking through and it's always awesome when it works. It's when something goes wrong and you got to try to troubleshoot and I guess to your point, if you've got the code, you can say, oh, go look here. You can, but if you don't comment the code.
But you know what, Gilbert, I have a solution for you. Yeah. You copy the code to Copilot, you paste it, and Copilot will tell you where the error is.
That's true. Yeah.
Supposedly.
Yeah. No, well, that's true. I've just sometimes taken I was working on something the other day and there was a comma missing somewhere, and I literally just copy pasted, put it in and I said, there's an error. And I went, oh, there's a comma here or comma missing. And I went, oh, thank you. Yeah, so for sure. Okay, well, it doesn't look like there's any other questions. So thank you, Tristan. That was really good. I definitely learned something tonight. And thanks for coming to present. And I'll put all those details on our Meetup page and onto YouTube. So yeah, thanks again.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
And maybe one day I will come to Australia. I will let you know. My dream is to come. So yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Great to have
See you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.